All right, welcome everyone to IT405. And joining us here tonight is Jake Johnson. And just prior to the recording, we're talking with everyone about Jake's background a little bit. So Jake, I'll let you share a little bit about yourself and whatnot too. But to give folks a little primer on Jake, Jake is a proud graduate, heavy on the proud there, Jake, of St. Mary's.
Yeah,
And one of the programs we were talking about, the GIS program, or the Data Intelligence Geoanalytics Master's Program from a number of years ago, which is another program that I work in and oversee. And Jake, this is IT 405, so this class deals a lot with digital forensics, and we have some labs that
sure.
kind of go through, principles of just understanding what's there for potential forensics and talking about a little bit more on AI and what's coming down the line for us. But prior to you coming in, Jake, we gave a little primer on that. While many people here are thinking about maybe security or forensics or looking to get into that arena, we have been emphasizing that you could be part of a great security team or be a great security analyst. We have some folks who are in those roles in this course, and then others who are in different roles. But where you're bringing in this, Jake, from your perspective, is really more from the business acumen side, and really how you're working with clients, how you're working with different types of consumer data to protect that data as part of a plan, so that you're working with the ops teams, you're working with the security teams, you're working with the data teams, you're working with the data collection teams, you're working with the leadership, you're working with the customer, the client interfacing as well. So you're in your role where we're talking about this is really instrumental in really bridging those two. So you can't have one without the other, but the role of kind of that initiating communication and initiating plans and ensuring that there's good coverage across all those spectrums is really important, rather than just, okay, yep, here I'm a security analyst, this is what I see, that's great. We want to paint that picture of what you do. Now, again, prior to the recording, I was sharing with people that you've worked in a ton of different fields, from like Target to some more of your current work with understanding the business landscape, particularly retail, grocers, real estate, and working with consumer data, working with client data, and how you protect all those, and what are the insights into that. So we were talking about the geo aspect. So I think people might be kind of excited to learn more about what exactly you're doing as in the real estate or in the grocery sector, which is ultimately as I'll kind of call it a consultant to help maximize grocery revenue ultimately, or volume. And likewise with different clients that are in the real estate arena, it's about product maximization, but in doing so, that all starts with data. And one of the core topics that we've been going through, from networks to Windows forensics to mobile forensics, which on our devices here has become a really important way that people are collecting data. And whether it's chat logs or different programs or apps or whatever, there's a tremendous amount of security and just, I'll call it best practice that that you're going through, that I know a little bit about you and some of the work that we've been doing over the years. So I guess to kind of fill in the gaps there, Jake, from what I was saying, if you want to share a little bit with the group about, kind of your story, where you started, some of the responsibilities.
Sure.
Well, we'll start there. Kind of what are you doing now, and kind of how did you get there?
Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah, so I was, like John mentioned, a graduate. I think it was 2010. I think that's when I graduated the program formally, John. That sounds right. And it was in GIS, so the geospatial science software, specialized, kind of took a business specialty as well, by overlapping with the business program and kind of focusing on it in John's classes. I think specifically it was the site location project, John, for Fleet Farm that we did. That really got me into it. I think that's when I knew I loved strategy and maps. I knew I loved data. I loved visualizing data. And GIS kind of already touched all those. And then when we did the site location project itself, it kind of the light bulb came on. Like, wow, I can see how this can be used so strategically to extract data, to answer questions, to tell stories, that it really got me excited. And so, from there, I got a
Jake,
job. Yeah,
just to back up a little bit. So some of
yeah,
the people here, they wouldn't be familiar with that fleet farm activity, and I can either paint it up, or if you can kind of paint it up from your experience as
yeah,
a student, what that really meant.
yeah. So I'm not sure if Wheat Farm is. Everyone should be at least Midwestern on this call, right? So they know. I think Fleet
Yep,
Farm,
most people should be, or well, I don't know what stores are
Menards,
out there either, but
Menards with some Gander Mountain in there, some fishing tackle.
yeah.
Anyways, so we are trying to find a new. I think it was find a new location for the next Fleet Farm, and kind of given some general guidance, direction, but really it was on the student to get creative and identify and defend the best locations for these new hypothetical fleet farms. And so yeah, we used a lot of our data, our spatial technology, kind of whatever inputs we could that we felt influenced or would be compelling within this search. And then we came back to kind of John and presented our locations and as to why, this is where we picked, this is why. Anything from highest traffic, best density, best demographic overlap, emulating sister stores, things like that. And so I think it was that project that really got me thinking, okay, how can I take this degree and turn it into something that makes me money that I also enjoy? And so it was a very practical but exciting degree in a good program. I was a geography undergraduate, and even with that, it was exciting, but I needed something that was a little more differentiating, and that's where this SMU program got me into where I am today. Starting at the Super Value up in Minneapolis, back when they owned Cub Foods and Save a Lot, Albertsons, that a large network. I started there as a site location analyst, finding locations, finding sites for Save a Lot. Eventually kind of working into the Cub Foods, Lund's, Kowalski's, some of the local grocers around there. From there, I stayed in the same thing for a while. I went to, on the corporate side, I went over to BJ's Wholesale Club, which is like a Costco of the East Coast. Target in Minneapolis, worked for their headquarters. Southeastern Grocers, which is a chain out of Jacksonville, kind of all doing the same thing, like providing intelligence on where to go to build stores and how to maximize store sales. And there's more than just the GIS aspect. It's a lot of, other aspects, merchandising, sales, kind of recon, just a lot of different things that go into it. And then eventually I got into consulting, where we helped a variety of retailers, still primarily grocers. And now today, I am a commercial broker trying to leveraging analytics and strategy to really differentiate. And so right now I'm still providing guidance on, our kind of advisory work on, hey, is this a good site? Is it, good investment? Where should I look? What's going to be the best place to build or open or whatever it may be, by leveraging a lot of the things I learned along the way on how to make those decisions.
And
So,
so, Jake, when you're talking through those experiences, and this will probably come up again, in our chat here tonight, from your time back at Save a Lot, and then you work through, different areas. Granted, some of them were very similar. Some of them had some nuance, like proprietary strategies and things like that. Can you maybe just share a little bit more in depth as to what that meant, like with your responsibilities for
sure.
some of those along the way? And where I'm going with this is I'm really interested in sort of tying into what data,
Yep.
has data changed? We're using the same data along the way? Because when people go through jobs or, careers, there's this impression that, yep, these are the experiences, but then, technology also happens, and new, proprietary or security becomes more prevalent. And how did
Yeah.
that maybe change the type of data that you were working with?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I think I can provide a good practical kind of daily view into challenges that I'm up against in terms of, operating within a secure, environment, but also kind of how are the front lines, protecting what you can before it gets to the true IT, level. Kind of what decisions, how should we act? How do we treat certain things that prevents a mess, right? And sharing. And in the positions I've had, I've been entrusted with a lot of that data. So I would say how it's changed broadly, or I guess, sorry, less, more specifically, the change has been how they approach you, not necessarily the data you're working with, but how these, the security threats are, kind kind of used, or the different tactics they're using. Back when I had started my job in 2010, if I had to send a text message saying a person's name that I knew at my company, saying my name, and having them click a link or call a specific number, I wouldn't have really thought twice about it. I would have thought, oh, I know this guy's higher up in the company. I'll call him. Now that's happening all the time. And so I think people have wised up to a little bit, but they're also they're getting more clever. And so I can't tell you, it's been every organization I've been at for the past, I don't know, 2 or 3 jobs, is that there's a lot of people trying to get a hold of you through your company. So for example, just the other day, hey, this is blah, 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 it's my boss from work, can you call me here, call this number quick, or, click this link, upload some of this, files to this link, whatever. Very, very convincing. And so, the big push has been from the corporate side is that these groups, these IT teams, the departments are sharing, saying, hey, be extra aware of this. And so we're constantly having to do training, and we're getting, reminders from different parts of the organization. Hey, this is a new scam they're trying. Don't share anything with the company, that's with the company. Don't share any personal information. And so I guess to answer your question on how it's changed is just the tactics, that you'll need to, the tactics to try to kind of get in, get data, get information. And then obviously how you react is just getting more and more personalized and harder to kind of differentiate.
If I think back to even my time at the school, and those who are, on the call here too can think about this, it was the Wild West in the early 2000s. I mean, I could find, I don't remember if I spoke about this in class or if it was somewhere else. I could find information on anything about Caribou Coffee. I could find I could find all the stores, the owners, the contact information, the annual sales, the revenue. It was freely available on the web. And I remember at that time thinking like, wow, this is pretty sweet, because I was using it for some class purposes, and since then, actually I still use some of that data, but I scrubbed the, for privacy. But then all of a sudden I think about it with technology, where they had local storage, or some people didn't even have security storage, and it was stored on, on people's PCs in the office and just on machines. And then it came to more networks and, saving things. Then it came time to log it. Like logins is another one that's changed over time. Like when you'd open up your computer and boom, it just open, if it's a work machine. We never had logins, years ago. And now there's logins, and then there's images. And so there's a ton of that has changed, just dealing with data. Now, migrating to, for the school, we have the Google Suite. So everything's, they want no local storage. They want networks, everything. It's all Google storage. Everything that we have, they want that. So it's become an evolution of not only really the types of data, where data has increased exponentially, the type of data that we're seeing, at school, and how we're trying to fit that and running really programs that can parse that out, make it easier to understand, on everything from demographics to whatever. And so from that, if I come back and ask that, Jake, for you, were you seeing similar things within those companies, or can you kind of comment a little bit on, not necessarily specifics of what company, but can you kind of share about like, in one particular company, they were really lax on not necessarily the security, but on the data privacy, or what have you kind of seen like with data privacy within different organizations?
Sure. I think the companies have always, there's always been some awareness. I think it's more so kind of like you said, times change, you kind of wake up to what's valuable and what's not. I think some of the most interesting ones are, I guess, they weren't mishandled, but some of the most interesting are some of the biggest, potential for issues that I've worked at are companies that would have loyalty card data, where there's a direct kind of log of where people, what they're buying, where they're shopping. And, fortunately, we've always had really good systems in place. So by the time it reached me, it was already, kind of scrambled and prepared in a way that anonymized things for analytics. But the person doing that work, was just down the hallway, right? And if you were to, provide access, someone with gained access to that information, they could tell a person's name, every product they had purchased, anything linked to that loyalty card, their address, where they've gone, and who knows how it would be used. Someone could say, oh, who cares? But really there can be ways that this can be used. Obviously it was good for, we used it. We didn't need to know specific who or what, exactly the combination together, who was buying and where. We want to know what was being purchased at certain locations. And so some of that data, that management's always been fascinating to me, and kind of how that's improved over the years, keeping it still highly valuable, but further kind of increasing the protection around keeping people's identity safe. And so I may know within a region, a smaller region, how many people bought organic food in a particular neighborhood, but by the time it gets to us, it's been anonymized and de-identified and all that stuff. And so that's been an interesting one to evolve over the years.
Do you know what exactly happens when you say kind of the de-identified process? Is that pretty standard now? And if so, do you know what those steps are? I presume is it scrubbing names? Well, no, because some of the addresses will tie back to locations, which is what you're maybe trying to do from a grocer standpoint, is to figure out who's buying what products, how much are they spending, and is a market right for a certain demographic ultimately?
Now I would say, I don't know, the process has changed. I've never been super familiar, but essentially what it's doing is it's taking away the name, and it's applying an aggregation to the latitude, longitude. So if the address is mapped to a specific address, it may be aggregated into a grid area. And so you can't figure out which exactly household it's going to, but anything, that address that fell within that grid is then aggregated. So you can kind of have, purposefully less granular. Even then, it can be so many records with no names that you'd have to know a person's address and click on a point. It would be a hard thing to do, but they're very safe about it, and it's only gotten better. I know on the other side, data we use, mobile data, so not even necessarily where you purchase data or where you purchase products. So it's not tied to a loyalty card, but it can be tracked from your phone. Kind of the same thing. It's intentionally anonymized. They provide a blur or an aggregation, so it's not house to house, but it's close enough where they can kind of tell if a person from this neighborhood is shopping at this specific store. And that data's gotten, I think, it's gone through some trials on kind of privacy, and I'm not sure what adjustments they've made. They've continued to they survived it, and they're still here, and they're still thriving. And so I just think that they're getting better at kind of providing the safety elements along with the data that you're getting.
And that's interesting too. Is I want to ask you, as we could go on, how you start those conversations when you work with clients, and what are those expectations? I'll get into that. And so when Jake was kind of talking about is that, if you think of, people have heard of demographics, like census data, that's essentially what, in a sense, Jake in his background has been trying to do, is to say, from a census standpoint, really the goals are to understand your target market, and markets are at the root value, at the root core. It's ultimately about your census data, such that, if you have census tracts, well, zip codes are very it's not really made for business use. I mean, some people do it, but it's for mailing purposes. But as you get down into census tracts, that becomes a little bit more homogeneous. In other words, you're getting more people who are alike, and then you get down into block groups, which are super, I'll call it detailed, like very like neighborhoods essentially. There, Jake, as you were talking about that. And what that means is that they're very, very homogeneous, which these people are kind of following a particular pattern, and then it becomes, if that certain demographic met I'm just making this up, Jake, like a Kroger or something like that, Kroger will be able to tailor products maybe to those areas, or where there are more of those people who are more apt to spend money or shop at Kroger. A profile, if you will, that can define characteristics that would perhaps suggest that a Kroger location would be viable in that location. But The privacy is really unique, I think, too, that you touched upon. Well, you kind of called it like blurring or kind of generalizing.
Yeah.
That's something that we see a lot in sentiment analysis too from mobile phones, is that, it's really hard to get an exact pinpoint, but it's kind of some generic information. But it all depends on what you're looking at and how accurate that information is. If it's indoor, uh, like indoor tracking on mobile devices, they're using just kind of that kinetic movement with your phone or pinging off of indoor Wi-Fi. Inside of stores, if you have, I don't have that enabled, nor I'm not really sure on this, Jake, but maybe like if you're walking through a store, a grocery store, for example, and you have a pattern, it's kind of like an Amazon. You go into Amazon and you buy products and then kind of predict what you need and what you have or what ailments you have based on what products you're purchasing. But as you get, or your pattern of behavior, so that after so many months, Amazon said, oh, are you due for a whatever, buy some more paper towels or whatever. But on your mobile phone, if you're walking through a grocer, I know you have some experience like with what some companies were experimenting with, different technology in their stores. But you walk past a particular product on an aisle and all of a sudden, bing, you get an alert on your phone, or you encounter a geo fence that says Aldi, $5 off, whatever it is, deli select cuts or
Yeah.
something like that. But can you comment a little bit on some of those that revolve around location and maybe that mobile technology a little bit, or what's going on in some of those stores?
Yeah. So mobile technology has been huge in retail real estate, just understanding movement. And I said, there have been maybe some privacy issues they've encountered, but I think they've navigated them well, and they continue to prove that they have enough protection associated with the data to where it's not an issue. But yeah, so it is location based, and so essentially, this group can understand where where you're at, where your primary household is, where you spend most of your time, where you're at work, and then where you shop. When your mobile device goes within the four walls of a building, they call it geo fencing. They'll kind of draw a border around a facility, and when the mobile unit goes within those four walls, it records the amount of time. If it meets a certain threshold, then they're considered a shopper, and they'll understand how many visits and how many trips. And so, while we don't personally have any security issues with this data, we're the users of it, and we don't own it. It is interesting to think about kind of some of the processes and probably challenges these groups have that do provide this data for users like me when we're making the decision, because it is so incredibly useful. You can learn a lot from how many people are entering certain locations, what time of day, how long they stay. And so if it were to be, I'm sure they have a lot of security processes in place to make sure that stuff is never, leaked, because it was, it's just a lot of information about personal travel, and kind of patterns throughout the day.
Another thing that I think about, and I always ask students this question, not necessarily in this particular class, but one that we're talking about now is data privacy, or with your mobile device, and it's a question that begs one of convenience. So I think it's something for us all to think about, that on your mobile device, if you have, Jake was mentioning like loyalty cards or apps, Jake, or whatever it is that people are going through. And it said, do you consent to us recording, location-based information? And there are, and Jake, maybe something we can talk about too, are some of the laws out there, and how, how you might have to go through, not specific laws, but just, things that what you can track, what you can't. But when you opt in for apps or location-based recording information, you're sort of, prior to the recording, we were talking about, do you want to do that? Or like you're giving up a little bit of your privacy for what people can, how they can track your sentiment or track what you're doing, your location, everything. But some people would say, you know what? I'm okay with doing that, Jake. I'm okay with letting people have access to my data, my purchase history, where I'm at, where I'm going. I'm okay with that so long as it improves my customer experience.
Yeah.
whether it's my customer experience in your store or it's how I get there, if it gives me access to coupons, if it gives me access to all of these things, I am okay with it. Other
Right.
people like, nope, I don't want anything to do with the privacy thing, so
Right.
I'm opting out of that. So can you comment on any trends or things like that that you might be seeing in your industry?
You know, I would say despite the concerns, valid concerns of privacy, the data still seems pretty like they still have a large sample size. And I haven't seen, you know, anything overly noticeable. I think it gets more and more challenging to want to get into people's, you know, private, have people make these decisions, that allow them to track people more. I think people are being starting to get sick of being tracked in everything they do. They want the privacy. And so I personally haven't seen anything change necessarily, just more so, there's more and more protection, but there's more and more requests to also track location. So it's just kind of, it seems like there's a constant balance between how can they track a little more and then how can they insert a little more privacy. I've seen maybe a little more transparency as of late, to be honest, but I've also seen, more requests to track. Everything you do, they want to know as a data point, not a specific company, just in general, like you were saying. And so, there's more and more opportunities to collect data. I think for people to deal with it, or for there not to be backlash, there's going to be more and more opportunities for people to have more control and transparency into their privacy.
Yeah, I was talking about laws, and laws are kind of changing different states and what you have access
Mhm.
to and what you can't. And such that, do you know offhand, and actually I don't know this, it was just a question that came in as you were talking about, we're talking about mobile forensics, for example. Let's say a company was extracting information on our mobile device.
Mhm.
And if there was a case in which there was something like there was a phishing attempt or an internal somebody giving out, data from a customer, like a customer database or something, do you know if there are any laws that would prohibit, let's say, authorities from going into that vessel of mobile data that has been collected about a particular user? Or if it's
I really
just,
don't.
I
I really
don't,
don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming that. So that's a good question. I really don't even. I don't even. Not even really familiar what's stored or what's recorded. At this point, I've seen both sides. I've more so. My experience has been using this data that gets my wheels spinning, and I understand directionally how it's collected. But there's a lot that goes on between the collection and then distributing to the end users, or even the internal analysis in many cases. Um, and so, from the mobile data standpoint, using customer tracking from a location standpoint, I have less insight into kind of how that all works. I just know kind of how it's used, if that makes sense.
yeah, it's one of which I think is a delicate balance between some laws and it seems like every state has different laws about what
Mhm.
what is recordable. But then I think there's the caveat to that is the opt-in. If you opt in, you may be absolved from, some of those laws. So I don't know. They're kind of, it's weird. It's changing, moving around a little bit. But yeah, it's one in which forensics is a kind of a interesting question of, whoever is collecting the data off of devices, could that be tapped into, or is it just held on the device? I don't know that. It's something I can try to look into a little bit more
Yeah, it's an
on
interesting,
that.
interesting one. And it may vary by company. There's a lot of different mobile data providers out there for what we call mobility data, showing movement for real estate, things like that.
Speaking of, company to company, I was thinking about this when we were talking a bit earlier. Can you share a little bit on what you might be seeing in your role, or what is how have different, maybe clients, if you will, what are their concerns, or how do you navigate that journey of them saying, okay, how are you going to protect our data? These are concerns we have.
Yeah.
How do you marry those? Because that's a conversation that, from a security analyst perspective, much yet alone, kind of forensics, how do you navigate that journey? And Jake, you can feel free to trailblaze here, show people a little bit more about what you do and what this all means in your arena. So I'll
Sure. Just so this will be just a super quick screen flash, but just so you know, it's easy to visualize what I'm talking about. Some of the data that we personally protect on our side often is intelligence on a particular client, or data we've collected that we don't want to leak out because it's valuable and it can be used, to make a lot of decisions. And so there's both ways. Some data we're receiving it's helped to inform our strategy. Some of the data we're collecting is informing our strategy. Some we don't want to release because we're protecting a client's request. Some we don't want to release because we're trying to keep that value. So it kind of varies. But just so you have an idea what we're talking about, let's say that this is Jacksonville and we have data on a handful of stores that sits in a database. And so we have sale, we have size, we have some specifics to the lease and the space itself, and that all this information has been either asked that we don't share it, or we've personally collected it, we know it's valuable, and so again we don't want to get rid of it. This is the type of information that is really important to kind of keep keep protected, whether it's the way that our database or our client collection works, or whether it's just keeping it personally protected, not going to the wrong person, keeping it confidential. But we'll take this data, someone may ask, and we know the store is doing this much, that's going to impact a lot of different decisions along the way, or could impact how we treat this store. We get information like this, and it's really important to know who you're sharing with. If someone has asked you to take the data to help guide future strategy, a new strategy, you're making sure that anything you're using and any of the output is not being shared. Maybe you're aggregating the data, but you're not saying this location is doing this amount, or this is the certain factor figure. You're just saying this is an area of interest, or this is a good store, or you're not even discussing any plans at all. Anything that's internal is just kept for our team to act on. It may be that we've received data and we want to put out, when we're consulting, some reports, aggregating and anonymizing. It's really, I think the main thing is coming down to protecting specific location details from numbers, if that makes sense, John. And so we're constantly either not sharing anything, or if we have to, we're generalizing or talking about a broader area. And from terms of my personal role, it's just being very cognizant of who I'm talking to, who I'm sharing data with, and where data is being stored. Whether it's in my personal, on a network still, but in a folder that our department only has access to. Password protecting certain documents that are sent, so only the certain individual that has it can unlock the PDF. Or just being careful that, hey, this conversation, what am I writing down here in this report? Am I sending an email to someone? The three messages before, was it copy pasted on accident in here, or was I having a conversation with someone earlier that was kind of loose with it? Didn't say anything to them then, but trying to make sure I just don't forward that on without kind of looking at what I'm sending or what's attached. And so I don't have a super sophisticated way of how I personally do it. I typically following rules and procedures that are in place, or I am just being very aware, kind of being very cautious and cognizant of how I'm treating sensitive documents. I would say that we have I guess my lack of sophistication comes in through, I should say, I don't have a very specific way of doing it from a communication standpoint. From a storage standpoint, you're leveraging all the tools and the rules and regulations that are in place, which does follow a sophisticated structure.
Yeah, I see that there's a tremendous linkage between all these things that are going on. And when we're talking about security in general, with regards to in any of your roles, can you share, for example, not necessarily specifics of plans, but so anytime that there's sort of a consultant or someone that you're working with, you have the client side, and then you have your organization side. You're both sort of mutually invested in each other. But is there a plan of like uniformity for how data's maybe protected or security? So for example, if you pick a grocer or a different client or whatever it is, are you expected to follow like a prescriptive model or kind of a chain of command or a chain of order for what they're doing and then for you? Or how do you align some of those, I guess, communication protocols, or I'll call it just general, maybe security protocols, if you know of any of those?
Again, that's a lot of these, specific examples are really handled by, the data team. Again, for me, I think it's being the best practices of how I handle the data, not so much of how it's and what I'm seeing, not so much how I'm personally storing it. I'll receive sensitive information, and you just know that, or not sensitive, confidential information, and you'll just know that you just can't go sharing it, and that wherever it's being stored, following the protocols that are in place to ensure that it's safe. I think where a person like me that's an everyday business kind of comes into play is just really being smart about who you're sharing what details with. You don't ever want to do anything that compromises. And so a lot of this, there can be all the tools and processes in place. You have to have some exposure and some understanding and just kind of, a feel for what you're doing. That kind of dictates that. Otherwise, there's just if you're reckless, understand what the data you're looking at, understand what's being sent to you, and understand how to manage it. It's just more so, I think, just being aware. If you don't know, ask type of
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So many times that there's infractions or whatever it is, it's just people not be, it just comes down to lack of caution. But did have a quick question here, or a question rather, Jake, for you in the chat. I can read that for if you got something up there, but it said, what kind of variances and sample biases do decision makers encounter regularly when dealing with data on that scale? And do you have any general examples? So I'm wondering if that's
Is that more so referring to like mobile data?
yeah, or
Data?
maybe it's precision of data, maybe dealing with data of like,
So I guess two things. One would be the again, I don't collect. I'm a user of the mobile data. I'm not a collector. And so I don't really know, but what the way it's explained to me is it's a sample size, and they feel, I think it's, I don't know, 500,000 devices that are, or sorry, 500 million devices that are being tried, or some astronomical number, right, of points that they have, but it's still a sample size. And the only way for us to really verify and vet some of that is to look at um, the correlation with sales. And so, if there's 300 some million Americans, and there's, I don't know, let's say they have 5% of the devices, it's a very small sample, but they feel like when they've tested the visitation, so how many visits per store, how does it closely to the line with the sales at a store, they've got it to an acceptable rate where they feel like it can do one, kind of directionally identify stores that have more visits than others and patterns associated. So where they're coming from. You don't need every person, every visit to understand directionally where people are coming from. And so I don't really know what their internal variance or kind of expectation or cutoff would be. I know that when we were testing some of this mobile data to use it, the consultant, we found about a 75 to 80% correlation between their total number of visits from their data and the store sales, which meaning directionally, it's pretty good. And so it obviously wasn't perfect, and it lacks, if you're in verticality. So if you're within a tall building, they have trouble understanding if there's floors above you, who's moving in where. And there's other ways around the data that was interesting in terms of tracking, but I don't know what their cutoff is, but we've seen a high correlation.
and Jake, I think you mentioned this too, but with with your operations, you were working with another vendor really for that mobile data.
Yeah.
Correct. Is that right? For the
Yes. So that's correct. Yes. So when I was on the corporate side, specifically, well, at a couple of companies, we would receive the processed internal customer data, which helped us just make decisions, look for holes, understand cannibalization. What this mobile data does is it tried to create that for every company. So they didn't need a loyalty card to understand where their customers were coming from. They don't have sales, but they did have visitation. And so while some companies I worked for, we had actual loyalty card data, but all the companies I've worked for since, I don't know, 2000, maybe 16, have had this mobile data product, which is trying to do the same thing, but for their competitors, for everything. And so, yeah, we were just purchasers of the mobile data. But when you in discussions of what this mobile data is, you're asking about their methodology and you're asking about how it's collected to kind of vet, does this make sense? And you can kind of start seeing how there is data privacy associated with it. And they're probably struggling, or they're probably encountering some of the things, same things retailers encounter, Target Red Card, your Amazon card, from a loyalty standpoint. I'm sure they're encountering similar things from just a device standpoint on, what can they give away or what can they use? What's too much? How do they be careful? How do they balance that effective, useful, actionable data with strong, solid privacy? So,
When you were talking about some of the technology, things that you've been kind of bombarded with as of late, with some of the phishing attempts, things
yeah,
like that, to get access to that, not necessarily, well, I mean, ultimately it's getting access to data, but,
yeah.
whatnot. Can you comment maybe on this? And I don't know, it's just a question that came into my mind there, but
Mhm.
looking at the span of time that you've been dealing with data and in the analytics and in the retail world, consumer data, consumer privacy, customer data privacy, whatever, can you talk about maybe some of perhaps the ways in which people, you did a little bit earlier tonight, but
Mhm.
some of the ways that those attempts have changed for people trying to I'll call it, get into the system, so to speak? Like, was it like phone
Yeah,
calls? Now it's kind of turned into like, maybe it's AI, maybe it's bots, whatever it is. I don't know.
yeah. What's weird is I don't know that even these phishing attempts are necessarily trying to access our company's data. Maybe, I'm sure that's part of it. A lot of it as of late has been, and I know that's part of it. A lot of it, but it's still to get personal data, so it's kind of like infiltrating. And I think they use the company as kind of a shell. And so while there is a lot of company that they're protecting, I've noticed a lot more kind of using the company as an excuse to get people to react. And so our at the previous company, a lot of the IT was, hey, a lot of phishing scams using your coworkers. And so they're up against that. How do we limit this? It's coming through company email, but they're still asking for personal stuff. And so it's almost, that from an IT security standpoint, that they're protecting their employees, because their company entity is being used as kind of a pathway to people. Hey, I'm a superior. You get an email from a superior asking urgency. A lot of things that kind of naturally trigger the human emotion and you know, um, obedience without having to say, guys, hey, it's a senior executive. I don't know. It's urgent. Kind of all the things that if it was a personal thing, you may ask a little more questions. But I've seen a lot more of these targeted through, hey, this is let's say it's your boss. Can't talk right now. Please call this number. I need some help. And it's coming from something that looks like a work email, unless you look closely. So that's really wrapped up, is trying to, you know, get at the employees through the employer's, name, which has been interesting.
Yeah, so really, really ramp it up on the social engineering side then.
Yeah.
Really,
Yep.
they're engineering
Yeah.
that. And but you're right. We'll get occasionally some of those through the school too. But you're right. It kind of triggers that emotional response. That, oh man, I better get this done. And there
Yeah.
are people that will do it. And
Yep.
it just doesn't seem quite logical. But we're seeing in the industry with AI. They're pretty convincing.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah. They are
requests are
absolutely.
becoming more and more convincing, and
Yeah.
it's becoming harder to differentiate,
It is.
from. So
Uh,
yeah,
I'll say it's just become it's a big, I don't really remember when I first started ever taking as many cybersecurity trainings, and now it feels like there's a handful of, there's a much more frequent stream of communication from IT department, but there's also just every year the security uh, trainings that you have to take are longer, bigger, and more specific. They'll run you through all these different examples of, hey, pick out how this is a phishing attempt. And every year, I'm sure you probably the same things, right? All organizations do now because it's so important. But just speaking personally, from starting at the beginning to now, you can just see that there's so much more data, and there's some, the capabilities of the people trying to get at this data is also increasing. And so it's been pretty wild to see that evolve, kind of how you can't just take anything anymore. Any number you call,
Yep.
website you click, it's just nonstop.
Yeah. It's almost all the time. I would agree that that's really, really ramped up. And, that's kind of one element of a threat that all of us, in different careers are dealing with. But can you, being on the kind of on the operations side of, development, and yet, kind of from the different business perspectives, if we're thinking specifically about, well, data in general, whether it's mobile or beyond that,
Mhm.
what do you see maybe now as the biggest, or maybe not the biggest, but like different types of threats that are out there that could compromise that data or maybe operations? I mean, we're kind of going with that, like the engineering, social engineering and stuff like that. Do you think that's one of the bigger threats, or do you see other different types of technology or AI, or what do you
Yeah, I
really
mean,
see going on out there
I
in your
really don't
industry?
know. Yeah, I think, it came down to we were really interested in protecting the data that we sold, that we collected and sold, because it was our backbone. You know what I mean? And if someone there's again two components to it: trying to protect client data we have, but also trying to protect the collected data, because without it, we would have nothing to sell. And so, there was a lot of uh, being able to monitor who's accessing what. I think a lot of it is the people, that you entrust, and the policies in place, or the measures in place to monitor and track this stuff. So I don't know if a better way to say it, but really who you give access to and how you can track who has access to information was just something that was always on our mind. Make sure that if this, we only give a login to certain people, because there's the capability to export a lot of data,
Yep,
and this data's value would hang and live on for years if it got into the wrong hands.
yep,
And so being able to understand, we always had a high trust, so it was never really need to get into the weeds, but we could go through if needed. Who has ever done a full export of this? Where did it go? Why? How was their access approved? And so, it kind of goes back to knowing who has access, but having a process that tracks and formally approves access to these things. Because at the end of the day, once someone has access to it, you're giving up a level of or you're placing a lot of trust in them. And so the process is just, the person is obviously just as important as the process, probably even more important.
Can you, with that being said, with threats and, being that, we're kind of talking about security, data, and everything else kind of surrounding that, what have you seen going on with, and I know you don't work in this exactly day to day, but just with careers and having a having a pulse on what's going on in security industry, and what
Mhm.
sorts of things can students take, or people that are maybe interested in, whether it's getting into the business field, a field where you're kind of connected in a lot of different parts like you are,
Mhm.
or just kind of general security. Can you comment a little bit on what you might be seeing growing in that industry, and what maybe people who are in careers, what they should be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like we said, the same theme. I mean, I think there's more and more data collected, there's more and more technology, and there seems to be at the same time more and more threats. And so I think it is a good field to go into if you're passionate about protecting those things. And also, there's going to be opportunity there. And I was kind of vague and generalized, but what I've just seen is um, growing demand. And as I said to you, there's more communication coming from these departments. There's more emphasis placed on it in terms of training. And it seems like an area that at one point in time, while important, has now become, absolutely critical. Whereas before it was kind of nice to have, or, kind of a few policies in place. Now they're full blown departments. So I don't see it changing. I don't see going away anytime soon. I think the need is going to continue to grow, and the threat will continue to grow. So um, naturally, the need will as well.
Yeah, and that's in so many different areas there too, Jake.
Mhm.
It's not just in one element. I mean, it's kind of across the board. And really, when I think of this. It's how do you diversify yourself from a technology standpoint and then an industry specific standpoint to be ready for some of those changes, you know,
Yeah,
that are coming.
yeah, I don't, I think kind of just sitting at the midpoint, like you said, with having being understanding technology, but also understanding the business you're in. I think that's how you'll have the best chance is, being technically savvy, but also having an understanding of the practical day-to-day aspects of the business. And so I think if you kind of approach businesses with those lenses, it's not saying don't specialize in one or the other, but have have an awareness of one if you're going to be on the other. And that's kind of how you succeed. You see the need, you see the everyday operations, how things are happening, what's going on. It'll inform decisions that you're making that'll actually be effective and can be implemented quickly. And you can see, change. And so, when one hand knows the other hand is doing like anything else, right? It's easier to and more effective. So I think you're going to implement the best security policies and practices if you know what exactly is going on in the business.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. Just to have kind of that operational awareness, really.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get you can get videos that are addressing things that aren't even possible at your company, or you can have policies in place that are kind of irrelevant. And I think just if a person was a little more customized and catered to the reality of your day to day, then those are the ones that are effective and people will follow. That makes sense.
Yep, definitely. And I'm just kind of watching the timer, Jake. I know thank you for taking all the time you did here tonight. We're not necessarily bound by time. I just want to be aware. I know you have some other things going on here this evening, but Jake had some time here to answer some questions. And so if those folks who are live joining us here tonight had any questions that you would like to ask, you can either drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and or your camera and ask Jake in person here. Keep in mind, folks, like we're acknowledging at the beginning that this part is recorded, but if you would like to ask a question off recording, just save that for a couple more minutes, and then I'll pause the recording, and then you can ask those off recording if that's something that you would rather prefer, just as an option. But anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask out here for Jake? Lucas?
Yeah, how do you foresee the change to your industry with the technology that AI is bringing?
Oh, good question. Yep.
I think a lot of the production, visuals, visualization, extracting key insights. I think a lot of that stuff will be fast. I mean, it already is. I'm already dumping in full spreadsheets and asking it to generate summaries, look for correlations. And so I see it changing a lot of the visuals and the quick insights, kind of the ability to extract, prepare that type of information. I think that's where I'm seeing a lot. I still notice that it needs a lot of guidance in terms of what to look for, not necessarily how to do it. And so, or I guess, and how it still needs a lot of informing in terms of, look for these characteristics. This is kind of look for this scenario, look for this competitor, look for this placement, do it this way. It still requires a lot of that expertise and the kind of the logic and common sense behind it, but it's much more, it's really sped up my ability to produce the visuals. So now I can get a thematic map with these, points across the United States that fit these 10 criteria. It could, select those 10 criteria, but the criteria that it's selected was what I informed it to do. And so it's like it still needs expertise, but it's taking out a lot of the production processing time is what I've seen the most of it.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So Lucas here. Others questions? All right, well, Jake, what I might do is just pause the recording here just for a moment, and then people might have some questions here off recording they may want to ask. So I'll pause this. So Jake, thank you for coming in here this evening and spending some time with us. And I know you do this periodically with your love for St. Mary's and all of our students here. So we can't thank you enough on behalf of all of us here, as well as the IT program and of course the master's program, St. Mary's community as a whole. So Jake, thanks so much on behalf of us all for
Yeah.
coming in tonight. And
Thank
we'll,
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you guys. Yep. See you later.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
John.
Thank you,
Yeah, bye.
Jake.